Trying to rule the vast, incredibly diverse Indian subcontinent, that's a challenge that has broken so many rulers throughout history. But for centuries, one dynasty managed to do what seemed impossible. They were the Mughals. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how they built an empire that would literally leave behind a blueprint for modern India.
Think about this. Every single year on India's Independence Day, the Prime Minister addresses the nation from the walls of the Red Fort in Delhi. And that spot, it's no accident. This was the heart of Mughal power. The fact that modern India's story is still told from this very stage just goes to show you how deep the Mughal legacy really runs. So let's get into it.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at where this dynasty even came from. Then we'll dive into the absolute genius of Emperor Akbar, the model king who designed the whole system. After that, we'll see how politics started to cause some serious cracks, leading to the empire's long decline. And finally, we'll wrap up with the powerful legacy they left behind.
So, who were the Mughals? Well, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They were actually descended from two of the most fearsome conquerors in all of history, which, as you can imagine, created a pretty interesting and complicated family identity.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. On their father's side, they came from Timur, a conqueror who had actually taken Delhi way back in 1398. They were incredibly proud of this connection. But on their mother's side, they were descended from the Mongol ruler Genghis Khan, and they did not like being called Mughal or Mongol because, well, that name was tied to the memory of horrifying massacres. So right from the start, they're juggling this really complex heritage.
All right, let's get to how this empire was really built to last. Every great empire has that one ruler who just defines everything. For the Mughals, that person was Akbar. He's the whole reason we're calling this explainer the model king, or as you might say, the model Raja. He was the architect who took a kingdom won by the sword and turned it into a stable, enduring empire.
And here is the absolute key to understanding him. Akbar's real genius wasn't just on the battlefield. It was his deep understanding that if you want to rule millions of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, you can't just rely on force. You need a system. You need a bureaucracy that can actually manage the place. At the very heart of his system was this idea of the mansabdar. The easiest way to think about it is like a grading system for all the nobles. Every important official was given a mansab, or a rank. This rank decided everything: their salary, and most importantly, how many soldiers and cavalry they had to bring to the imperial army. It was a totally brilliant way to tie the entire ruling class directly to the emperor.
So, how did you pay all these powerful officials? Well, it wasn't with a bag of gold from the treasury. They were paid with jagirs. A jagir was basically the right to collect taxes from a piece of land. The noble didn't actually live there or govern it. Their servants would just collect the revenue, which served as their salary. Meanwhile, the noble himself might be off serving in a totally different part of the empire. And this system scaled up beautifully across the entire empire. The whole territory was divided into provinces, or subas. Each one was run by a governor, the subadar, handling both political and military stuff. But, and this is key, to keep him from getting too powerful, his authority was balanced by a separate financial officer, the diwan, and a military paymaster, the bakshi. It created a clear chain of command with built-in checks and balances. Just brilliant stuff. But the real secret sauce, the software running on this whole administrative machine, was Akbar's philosophy of sul-e-kul, which means universal peace. In a land with so many different religions, Akbar knew that discrimination and division were just recipes for disaster. So his policy focused on tolerance and a set of ethics like honesty, justice, and peace that pretty much everyone could get behind, no matter who they prayed to.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. This quote from Akbar's own son, Jahangir, says it all. He said that under his father, the road to intolerance was closed. He describes a kingdom where different faiths could worship freely. Now, this wasn't just some nice, feel-good idea. This was the essential social glue that held his incredibly diverse empire together.
So it sounds like a perfect system, right? Well, even the best designed machine can be broken by good old-fashioned human ambition. And the Mughals had one particular family tradition that was basically a recipe for constant destabilizing conflict. That tradition was called co-parcenary inheritance. Now, unlike in Europe, where usually the oldest son got everything, the Mughals following a custom of dividing the inheritance among all the sons. It sounds fair, doesn't it? But when the inheritance is an entire empire, it's pretty much an open invitation to civil war. And this slide just lays out the brutal results. It became a vicious, repeating cycle. Son rebels against father. Prince Salim, who would become Jahangir, rebelled against Akbar. Then his son, the future Shah Jahan, rebelled against him. And in the most famous and bloody example, Shah Jahan's son Aurangzeb waged a terrible war against his own brothers, killing all three of them to seize the throne. All this infighting was a massive drain on the empire's strength.
And all this brings us to the reign of Aurangzeb. This is the period where that carefully balanced system that Akbar built really began to buckle and unravel under enormous pressure.
Just take a look at these numbers. Even before Aurangzeb, during the time of his father Shah Jahan, the system was already under major strain. A tiny elite, just 5.6% of the nobles, controlled over 61% of the empire's entire revenue. I mean, that is just glaring inequality. It created huge economic pressure and resentment, with almost all the wealth concentrated at the very top.
So under Aurangzeb, all these pressures just boiled over. You had a crisis where there were way too many nobles and not enough land grants or jagirs to pay them all. The treasury was being completely drained by constant, expensive wars. And this is so important. He abandoned Akbar's delicate balance of defeating but still honoring his opponents. For example, his public insult of the great Maratha chief Shivaji turned a potential partner into a sworn enemy, sparking decades of rebellion that the empire could not afford. So the empire eventually weakened and fragmented. But did it just disappear? Not even close. You could argue its greatest legacy wasn't its emperors or its armies, but the very systems they created. And here's the main takeaway. The Mughal administrative framework was so good, so effective, that even when the central government collapsed, the new kingdoms that popped up all over the subcontinent, and later, even the British, they just adopted huge parts of it. The blueprint for how to run the place was just that solid.
So what did they leave behind? Well, for starters, that blueprint for a central government, a tax collection system that was used for hundreds of years, and maybe most important of all, the very idea that the entire subcontinent could be governed as one single political entity. And, of course, there's the breathtaking art and architecture that still defines the landscape of India today.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. The Mughals proved that a brilliant system can build a massive empire. Akbar's model of administrative genius combined with social tolerance was an incredibly powerful formula. But the story of the empire's fall also shows us that when personal ambition starts breaking the system and when intolerance replaces that delicate balance, even the greatest empires can begin to crumble. It really makes you wonder, what's more important for an empire's survival, the system itself or the wisdom to maintain it?